So have you ever been sitting up at night wondering what it takes to do a service on a T-72? Working here in the mechanical section is not always about fixing sort of burnt, busted, blown up and buggered equipment, but sometimes it's just simply about doing some maintenance. So I'm going to give you a bit of a rundown on what's needed to do a service on a T-72. Basic outline of the workflow. What I plan to do is service the oil filters, check the air cleaner, check the water level, check the fuel filters, inspect engine oil level. Stuff that you need for doing the service. Buckets and drip trays are really important. Plenty of tools, especially one of the most important tools you can ever have, your adjustable spanner. Lots of engine oil and lots of cleaning products, because if you've got old grubby hydrocarbons staining stuff, the best way to deal with it is with clean new hydrocarbons. Selection of straps and lifts to help with heavy components. Something else that's very important is to have an assistant. And lastly, instruction manual. So after doing the T55, we actually found it pretty amazing how very similar the parts are on the T-72 and even the T-34. It's incredible actually. The oil filter housing, the oil centrifuge assembly, cam covers, intake manifold, injector pump, fuel filter housing, everything's almost identical compared to the older vehicles. Of course there's a big difference. The T-72 has an engine driven supercharger which is boosting engine power, so that's not present on any of the other older tanks. Layout of the hoses, water hoses, all that sort of stuff is it's uncanny how similar it is. I guess they think once you're on a good thing you stick to it. Yeah, just out of interest, quickly I walked over to the other side of the museum where we've got a couple of T-34 engines. Even to the untrained eye you can see how incredibly similar the manifolds, injector pump, cam cover, exhaust manifolds, oil filter housing, from underneath the water pump, all of that stuff is almost identical to the T-72. One of the first jobs I like to do before starting is to label stuff. I know this is engine oil. If the armoured deck is down on the tank and bolted into place, they do give you a way of quickly checking stuff. So this is the port which you open to check the engine coolant, voda. Yeah, so it might seem slightly obsessive, me scribbling stuff all over these things, but if we can save any own goals, it's always going to be better for us. Air filter is eerily similar to the T-55, except it's double the size and twice the weight. And if you look at it carefully, it's been made out of repurposed pot scrubbers, I think. This is pretty cool. This is the air intake for the supercharger. So this thing spins around at high RPM and pressurizes the air going into the engine. It's not worn. Sometimes if the air filters have been dirty, all the sharp edges off the blades will be worn off, so that looks good. And according to the manual, you soak one of these in engine oil and the other two in diesel fuel, and then you let it sit for about 20 minutes to drain the oil out of it. That's how you service the air filters. So I'll go ahead and do that off camera. Fitting back the air filter is just the reverse, rinse and repeat. Off camera while I was at it, I also cleaned the oil filter, but I found something that's, well, I found pretty funny. And 3. So it's like a Russian doll. Anyway, I found it funny. Good news though, didn't find anything too terrible on the filters, so it made a nice change to actually pull it apart, and it was pretty clean. We're powering through the jobs here. Probably my least favourite is our old friend, the dual fuel filter assembly. Every time I touch one of these things, even though I replace all of the washers here with new ones, I can just never seem to get them to not leak without stuffing around for ages and ages. I'm starting to learn a few things about serviceability and thought put into designs, and look, I know it's only a very tiny thing in the grand scheme of stuff, but in order to get the fuel filter out, there's all these bolts and stuff you got to take off, and pipe fittings and that, but they've gone and specifically put a clamp here which is attached to the body of the fuel filter with a bolt holding it through, and the bolt's welded to the clamp, so you can only get to it from underneath, but you know, you can't get a spanner or a ratchet or anything in there, so you've got to try and lever it up somehow, enough to get a spanner underneath it to undo the nut and hopefully release the clamp. But it's just, I don't know, I wonder if this Soviet stuff was sort of designed by a committee, and the only committee that didn't have any people in it was the integrations committee. And for those of you interested, that noise you can hear, that's the Walker Bulldog. The Walker Bulldog that Silvio's just got running for us. It's another fan favourite at Ozarma, so yeah, get your tickets, they're selling fast if you want to ride in either of these tanks. Quick explanation of how the filter works. The fuel comes in from an engine driven pump on this side. Some of the fuel goes out to the smoke system, goes through this first filter here, and then travels through the second filter, and then comes out of this port here to the injector pump. So I mean, the filters don't look too bad. I'm wondering what horrible stuff is maybe in the bottom. Oh yeah, a bit of nice black stuff. Not too bad. You know, sediment, bit of water, filter's doing its job. A few little chunky bits, so there you go kids. That's why you should always change your fuel filters regularly. Thanks to a kind viewer that explained to me that the idea of taking them apart and stripping them down is that you can wash the individual components in clean diesel. So I've gone ahead and done that, and it just goes to show that even an old dog like me can learn a few new tricks. Things I always watch out for when putting it back together again, probably see how flogged out the sealing washers are. That's some of the reason why there's always fuel leaks, and it's quite common on the Soviet stuff that the actual sealing surfaces are not parallel. I'm going to make use of my new best friend, these really trick sealing washers that have got a rubber insert in them that takes the place of your conventional copper or metal washers or fibre washers. Nip it up for now, and when it comes to putting it back into the vehicle and it's bolted up to its brackets, I'll give it a final time. Time now to do a leak test. Loosen off this port at the top of the filter assembly to help bleed some air out of it. And down here we have our old friend, the priming pump. And honestly, I can hear fuel swishing, so that's a good sign. It hasn't changed at all from the T-74. That's what I call longevity of design. And I've got to love these fans. All of the old Soviet stuff, you always find a fan. And it's really funny, they make this one, the blades of rubber, so obviously if you get your hands in there or legs or whatever, it's not going to chop you to pieces. But yeah, very cool. It's very seminal Soviet, these fans. Time to kick the thing in the guts and see if it'll run. I tell you what, it's eerily similar again to even the T-34, so you can really see its lineage where it's come from. And I wonder if the current generation of Russian tanks, including the mythical T-14, has some of the same stuff in it. I'd probably hazard a guess that it would. Prime the fuel system, just give it a few more pumps just for good measure. Make sure it's in neutral, handbrake is on. The engine actually physically won't turn over until the oil pump is run enough to get some oil pressure up. Hey Silvio, I'm going to start this up, alright? Yes. Master switch on. Keep an eye on oil pressure. Pretty disconcerting with this tank because it seems to be, especially when the RPM's a bit low, if it's below about 600, 700 RPM, that the tank, you can feel the transmission sort of wants to go, even though the brakes are on and it's in neutral, which is a bit, takes a bit of getting used to. It looks pretty leak free, all the stuff that I've done. I haven't introduced any extra problems, which is good. Got to top up the cooling system, and then we just check the engine oil too. Little jobs out of the way. Engine coolant is topped up. I've put back the locking tabs for the mounts for the fuel filter, put on the lock wire for the nuts. It's leak free, which is good. Got to get the engine deck back bolted down so that I can access the transmission compartment to do a few checks there. So let's do it together. Just in case, but so you
I have something.
You got it? Okay, I'll take the hammer out. My fingers are out. Let it down.
Perfect.
Beautiful. This is the rear deck / radiator assembly, and it's insanely heavy. It's got this sort of assist mechanism with a locking thing in it, but I really don't want to trust it, so we'll keep the strap there with a bit of tension on it. It sort of exposes the drivetrain in the rear of the tank. Layout wise, not a huge amount different from our old friend the T-72, but big difference with this tank is that they've gone to like a full hydraulic control system for the transmission and the steering brakes. Obviously got 3 times as complicated as what the T-72 is. What we're interested in now is to dip the oil tank, check the level for the engine oil. One of the cool little tools I've found in one of the toolboxes of the T-72 is this level gauge. Each quadrant has a particular calibration for a particular thing to dip. So majority of them are all fuel tanks because the whole right hand side of the tank is just a series of fuel tanks, plus you've got the main fuel tank. But the two that we're interested in today is the engine oil and the transmission oil. So I went ahead and used a translator to translate Polish and stamped in there the English translation for us dummies that can't speak multi-languages. Open up the port for the oil and check the oil level. I'm expecting it's going to need some. you should start the engine up, get it a bit warm, and then switch it off and check the oil level no earlier than 15 minutes after switching off the engine. Bottom. And yes, I think it's probably a bit thirsty. It's supposed to have between 60 and 65 litres when the engine is full, but yeah, it's reading less than 20 litres. Good thing we checked it, huh? 10 litres isn't even going to touch the sides. Yeah, so that's much better now. So we're almost at the capacity for this thing. That concludes our servicing the T-72s. I'm glad that we did this and gave it a good check over, because it's such a important vehicle in the Alzheimer collection. Hope you enjoyed it. For me, and I'm sure probably Silvio is the same, I think we'll really look forward to having a beer today after this.